A shocking moment unfolded mid-flight, one that no one on board saw coming. The pilot, of all people, made a racist remark about Barack Obama. But what happened next? It changed everything. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? The cabin hummed with the low, steady vibration of the engines, a sound so constant it blended into the background. Barack Obama sat back in his seat, fingers lightly gripping the armrests as the plane prepared for takeoff. Outside, the endless stretch of the runway shimmered under the amber glow of scattered floodlights. The familiar scent of leather upholstery mixed with the faint aroma of fresh coffee, small comforts that reminded him of the countless flights he had taken during his years as president. But this flight was different. For the first time in years, he wasn't surrounded by Secret Service agents. No security detail. No stack of briefing papers demanding his attention. Just him, a civilian now, traveling alone to a quiet destination for a much-needed break. The shift from the relentless pace of political life to moments of solitude was still something he was adjusting to. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Memories surfaced, late nights in the Oval Office, the weight of decisions that shaped the country, the roar of cheering crowds, and the voices of those who doubted him. He thought of Michelle, the steady anchor in his life, and the bittersweet nostalgia of watching his daughters grow up while balancing the weight of leadership. A faint smile crossed his lips. For once, he had the chance to slow down. Then, footsteps. A flight attendant approached with a polite smile, holding a tray of drinks. But there was something in her eyes, something barely noticeable, nervousness. "Good evening, Mr. Obama," she said softly. "Would you like something to drink?" "Just water, thank you," he replied, keeping his tone easygoing. As she placed a glass on his tray table, he noticed a slight tremor in her hands. Even now, his presence carried weight. He offered a reassuring smile, hoping to put her at ease. As she moved down the aisle, Barack let his gaze drift across the cabin. Business travelers, casually dressed tourists, a young couple snapping selfies, most were lost in their own worlds. But a few glanced his way, quickly looking away when they realized they'd been caught. Some eyes held admiration, others curiosity. And a few, though fleeting, carried something else, skepticism. Judgment. It was a look he had seen many times before. The engines roared, the plane rolling forward before lifting off into the night sky. City lights faded beneath them, swallowed by darkness. For the first time in days, he let himself breathe. Then, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A tension in the air. Quick glances exchanged between flight attendants, hushed whispers near the galley. Something wasn't right. His attention snapped to the cockpit door. It opened briefly, revealing the pilot. A tall, broad-shouldered man, scanning the cabin with a gaze that lingered on Barack a little too long. Too intense. Too deliberate. And that's when everything changed. Stay tuned, because what happened next? No one saw it coming. Tensions ran high at 30,000 feet. A routine flight took an unexpected turn when the pilot, a man with a cold, calculating gaze, set his sights on one passenger in particular. That passenger? Barack Obama. What happened next left the entire cabin in stunned silence. Before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? The hum of the engines was steady, a rhythmic pulse that blended into the background. Barack Obama sat back in his seat, fingers loosely wrapped around a glass of water, his mind still processing the strange tension that had settled over the cabin. He had flown countless times, but something about this trip felt off. It started with the whispers. A flight attendant exchanging hushed words with her colleague, her eyes flicking toward him before quickly looking away. Then there was the captain, a tall, imposing figure who had briefly emerged from the cockpit, his sharp gaze lingering on Barack a moment too long. Not just curiosity. Something else. Something deliberate. The captain disappeared back into the cockpit, the door clicking shut behind him, but the unease remained. Barack took a slow breath, steadying himself. Maybe he was overanalyzing. Maybe it was nothing. But years in politics had taught him one thing: trust your instincts. And right now, his instincts were screaming. Outside, the world was a blanket of darkness, city lights flickering below like distant memories. The cabin had settled into a quiet rhythm, passengers lost in their own thoughts. But then, the cockpit door opened again. This time, the captain stepped fully into the cabin. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid. The murmurs of passengers died down as he walked down the aisle, an unspoken tension following his every step. He stopped a few feet from Barack, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Obama," he said, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. "I hope you're comfortable." Barack met his gaze, his tone polite but firm. "I am." "Thank you." A brief pause. Then the captain continued. "I couldn't help but notice your presence on board tonight. It's not every day we have such a high-profile passenger." Barack offered a faint smile, keeping his demeanor calm. "I appreciate the hospitality. Nice to have a quiet flight for a change." The captain's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm sure. However, I couldn't help but wonder, how exactly did you come to be on this flight?" The question hit differently. It wasn't casual. It wasn't small talk. It was pointed. Accusatory. A few passengers shifted in their seats, sensing the change in tone. Barack's smile faded slightly, replaced by quiet resolve. "I booked my ticket just like everyone else," he replied evenly. "Is there a problem?" For a split second, something flickered in the captain's eyes. Then, he straightened. "Not at all. Enjoy the rest of your flight." With that, he turned and strode back toward the cockpit, leaving behind an air thick with unspoken tension. The murmurs resumed. Barack leaned back, his mind racing. That question hadn't been about security. It hadn't been about logistics. It had been about something else, something personal. He could feel the weight of eyes on him. Some passengers stole quick, guilty glances. Others weren't as subtle. A woman a few rows behind whispered to her companion, her tone edged with something conspiratorial. "I told you it was him," she muttered. "I don't know what he's doing here, but it's not surprising there are questions." Her companion replied too softly for Barack to hear, but he could guess the tone. Accusation. Doubt. He had seen it before. And he knew this wasn't over yet. What happened next? No one on that plane was prepared for it. Stay tuned. The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Something wasn't right. And Barack Obama could feel it. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? As the flight continued, Barack's mind drifted, not to politics, not to his years in the White House, but to a memory buried deep in his past. He was 8 years old. A quiet, observant boy in a mostly white school in Hawaii. One afternoon during recess, a classmate's toy had gone missing. Without evidence, without hesitation, the teacher had turned to Barack. The accusation had been swift, cutting. "Did you take it?" He hadn't. But that hadn't mattered. The teacher's voice carried judgment, and the eyes of his classmates burned with silent agreement. Later, when the toy was found in another child's bag, the teacher had offered a weak apology. But the damage had already been done. He never forgot that feeling. And now, sitting in this airplane, thousands of feet above the earth, he felt it again. The stolen glances. The hushed whispers. The question from the captain that wasn't really a question at all. Then, a chime from the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be experiencing some turbulence shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Routine words. But something in the captain's tone was wrong. Too clipped. Too controlled. Barack's eyes flicked toward the front of the cabin. A flight attendant was whispering to a passenger, her expression tense, her gaze shifting toward the cockpit door. His instincts, honed over years of navigating high-stakes situations, told him this wasn't just about turbulence. Then the plane shuddered, a ripple of turbulence rolling through the cabin. The seatbelt sign blinked, and passengers obeyed, some with annoyance, others with quiet unease. The dimmed cabin lights cast long shadows, stretching across uneasy faces. Barack adjusted his seatbelt, but his attention remained fixed on the cockpit door. Then, movement. The door swung open abruptly. The captain stepped out, his steps slow, deliberate. But this time, there was no mask of courtesy. His jaw was tight. His shoulders squared. His eyes locked onto Barack with an intensity that sucked the air out of the cabin. Passengers fell silent. The captain stopped at Barack's row. "Mr. Obama," he said, his voice low, weighted with authority. "I need to speak with you. Privately." A pause. A ripple of unease spread through the cabin. Barack met his gaze, calm but alert. "Is there a problem, Captain?" The man's expression hardened. "Please, follow me." For a moment, Barack hesitated. Not out of fear, he had faced greater threats, but because he could feel the shift in the air. The unspoken question hanging between the rows of seats. The assumptions. The judgments. Then he unbuckled his seatbelt. Stood up. All eyes were on him. Across the aisle, a woman whispered to her companion. Barack caught fragments of her words. "Trouble, should have known, makes sense now." The captain led him forward, past rows of passengers who avoided his gaze. Past flight attendants standing rigid, their faces carefully neutral. All except one. A flicker of something, sympathy, fear, passed through her eyes before she looked away. The captain gestured toward a narrow corridor near the cockpit. He stood firm, blocking the view of the passengers behind them. Barack exhaled slowly. "What's this about?" The captain crossed his arms. His expression darkened. And that's when Barack knew this wasn't just a flight anymore. Something else was happening. And whatever it was about to change everything. Stay tuned. Barack Obama had been thrown off the plane. Not because of a security threat. Not because of an emergency. But because the captain, stone-faced and unwavering, had made a decision. A decision that would shake the entire cabin. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? The tension had been building from the moment the captain set his eyes on Barack. First, the cryptic question. Then, the hushed whispers among the crew. And now, the captain stood before him, arms folded, his voice edged with quiet authority. "There's been a report of irregularities regarding your presence on this flight. I need to verify your credentials." Barack frowned, his patience thinning. "My ticket is valid. I passed every security checkpoint like any other passenger." "What kind of irregularities are you talking about?" The captain's eyes narrowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need to explain myself to you. I'm responsible for the safety of this flight. And I've determined that your presence poses a potential issue." A potential issue. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Barack studied the captain's face, searching for the reasoning behind this absurdity. But then, the final blow came. "You're leaving this plane. Now." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Barack's eyes widened slightly, though his expression remained calm. "You can't be serious. Either you disembark voluntarily, or I will have no choice but to involve law enforcement at our next landing point," the captain replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Barack took a slow breath, weighing his options. He could fight this, force a confrontation, but that would only escalate the situation. Or he could comply, for now, and deal with the consequences later. He exhaled. "I'll go," he said evenly. "But this isn't over." The captain stepped aside, motioning toward the cabin door. The murmur of passengers grew louder as Barack walked forward. Whispers slithered through the air. Eyes darted toward him, some wide with shock, others filled with something colder. A man near the front smirked before turning away. That look. That expression of quiet satisfaction. It stung more than anything the captain had said. The plane had landed at an unscheduled airport. The runway was bathed in harsh floodlights, the cold night air slicing through the cabin as the door creaked open. The flight attendants hesitated, their hands trembling as they unlocked the exit. Barack stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He could feel the weight of the passengers' stares pressing against his back. Their judgment. Their indifference. Then the door shut behind him. With a deafening thud, the connection was severed. He stood on the cracked asphalt of the runway, the roar of the plane's engines growing louder as it taxied away. The cabin lights disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the night. For the first time in years, Barack Obama felt truly isolated. Not politically, not ideologically, but physically, standing alone on an unfamiliar runway, the world he had known slipping further away with every passing second. The night air wrapped around him, cold and unwelcoming. He adjusted the collar of his jacket, his breath visible in the frigid air. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of airport machinery. Then he turned. The airport was eerily quiet, its cracked pavement bearing the scars of time and neglect. The flickering runway lights barely illuminated the sprawling emptiness. Far in the distance, a cluster of buildings loomed, their jagged silhouettes cutting into the dim horizon. Barack inhaled sharply, pushing aside the wave of disbelief. His mind shifted from shock to practicality. He needed answers. He needed to figure out where he was. And he needed to figure out why this had happened. He started walking, his footsteps echoing against the silent tarmac. The air carried the sharp scent of jet fuel and damp earth, a mix that only deepened the surreal nature of the moment. Despite the chill, he moved with steady determination, the same resolve that had carried him through countless battles before. Then he heard it. A sound. Distant voices. Barack froze, his ears straining to catch the direction. The voices grew louder. Then, the unmistakable crunch of gravel. Someone was coming. Barack Obama had been left stranded in the middle of nowhere. Forced off a flight under circumstances that reeked of something deeper, something calculated, he now found himself walking across a desolate runway, his breath visible in the cold night air. But just when he thought he was alone, voices carried through the darkness. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? A crunch of gravel. A flicker of movement. Barack turned toward the sound, scanning the shadows as three figures emerged. A woman and two men, their faces partially obscured by the dim light of a flickering lamp post. They moved cautiously, their expressions shifting from wariness to shock. "Wait, is that?" The woman's voice trailed off, eyes widening. "It is," one of the men muttered, his tone laced with disbelief. "It's him." Barack raised a steady hand, his voice calm but firm. "Good evening. I could use some help." The three exchanged glances, uncertain. Then, the woman stepped forward. "We didn't expect to see anyone out here, let alone." She hesitated, her words hanging in the air. "Are you okay?" Barack nodded. "I'm fine. But I've been left in a situation I didn't anticipate. I need to figure out where I am and how to get back." The younger man, hesitant but sincere, finally spoke. "You're in the middle of nowhere, basically. Closest town is about 10 miles that way." He gestured into the dark. "We live a little closer. You could come with us. It's not much, but it's something." Barack considered his options. He had no resources, no immediate way to navigate unfamiliar terrain. He nodded. "I'd appreciate that." As they walked, the woman introduced herself as Maria, and the two men as James and Carlos. They spoke of their small, tight-knit community, a place long forgotten by those in power. "We're used to being overlooked," Maria said with a bitter smile. Not many people care what happens out here. Their words struck a chord. It was a story Barack had heard before, communities abandoned, left to fend for themselves against corruption, poverty, and neglect. It reminded him of his early years as a community organizer, sitting in church basements and listening to stories just like this. When they arrived at the settlement, it was exactly as Maria had described. Modest homes built from salvaged materials, their walls weathered by time and hardship. The faint glow of lanterns lined the pathways, casting long shadows that flickered with each gust of wind. The air smelled of wood smoke and cooking food. At the center of it all stood an older man named Hector, the community's leader. He watched Barack carefully, his expression unreadable. "You've seen the world," Hector said finally, his voice rough but not unkind. "What brings you to ours?" Barack recounted the events of the flight, the moment he was forced off. Hector listened in silence, his gaze unwavering. When Barack finished, Hector leaned back, thoughtful. "Sounds like you've been dealt a raw deal," he said. "But out here, that's just another day." Over the next few days, Barack immersed himself in the rhythms of the settlement. He worked alongside the residents, repairing rooftops, tending to small gardens, listening to their stories. Maria spoke of her dream to see her children get an education. James and Carlos recounted their fight against corporations trying to exploit their land. Hector described the endless battle with local officials who ignored their pleas for basic resources. And Barack listened. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting the sky in deep gold, he sat with Hector by a crackling fire. "You've got something special here," Barack said, admiration in his voice. "Something worth fighting for." Hector nodded, eyes reflecting the firelight. "We fight every day. But sometimes, it feels like we're just holding on, waiting for the world to notice." Barack stared into the flames, his mind turning over the possibilities. Maybe it's time to make them notice. Morning came with a crisp chill. The settlement stirred to life, voices and hammers filling the air. Barack stood outside Hector's home, watching as people carried on with their daily struggles. He had learned more in these few days than he had in years of political briefings. But now, it was time to go back. He approached Hector, who was overseeing repairs on the settlement's border fence. "I owe you and the community more than I can express," Barack said. "But now, I need to go back. And I need to make sure what happened to me doesn't go unanswered. If I can help shine a light." Hector interrupted him with a knowing look. "Then go. And don't let them silence you." Barack nodded. He had arrived in this place by force. But he was leaving with something else, purpose. Because this wasn't just about a flight. It was about justice. Barack Obama's forced removal from the flight was just the beginning. What should have been an ordinary journey turned into something much bigger, a moment that would ignite a fight for justice far beyond the walls of that airplane. Abandoned in the middle of nowhere, he found unexpected allies. The cold night air bit at his skin as Barack Obama stepped off the plane onto a desolate runway, the roar of the engines fading into the darkness. He had been cast out, without cause, without justification, left stranded in an unfamiliar place with no explanation beyond the thinly veiled prejudice of the captain's words. As he walked toward the distant flicker of lights on the horizon, the silence was broken by voices. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, a woman and 2 men, their expressions shifting from caution to shock as they recognized him. "Wait, is that?" the woman started, her voice trailing off. "It is," one of the men replied, disbelief clear in his tone. Barack raised a steady hand, his voice calm but firm. "Good evening. I could use some help." They hesitated, but then, seeing the exhaustion in his face, the determination in his eyes, they nodded. Maria, James, and Carlos led him toward their community, a place forgotten by the rest of the world, where people had long learned to survive on their own. As Barack listened to their stories, he realized that this wasn't just about him. Their struggles, poverty, corruption, and systemic neglect, were part of a much larger problem. A pattern that played out in towns and cities across the country. People will care, Barack assured their leader, Hector, as they sat by a small fire that night. They just need to see what's at stake. Hector studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. If anyone can make them notice, it's you. The fight was only beginning. With Maria and Carlos's help, Barack arranged transportation to the nearest city. The journey was long and rough, the roads filled with potholes, the land around them barren and untouched. But as the city skyline finally emerged in the distance, he felt his resolve solidify. This wasn't just about one flight. This was about exposing a system that allowed prejudice to persist unchecked. The moment he stepped off the bus, everything changed. The air felt different. People in the crowded streets did double takes, their faces lighting up with recognition. Some approached hesitantly, offering words of support, while others extended their hands in silent solidarity. News of the incident had already begun to spread. Passengers from the flight had posted about it on social media, their first-hand accounts painting a picture of injustice. The story had taken on a life of its own, but Barack knew that if he didn't take control of the narrative, it could easily be twisted, diluted, or forgotten. He wasted no time. Within hours, he was in contact with his former aides, trusted advisors, and allies from his presidency. They gathered in a small office, their faces a mix of concern and determination as Barack recounted every detail, the captain's hostility, the hushed whispers of the crew, the moment he was forced off the plane. Then, he laid out the plan. Speak out publicly, not just about his experience, but about the countless others who faced similar injustices without the platform to fight back. Hold the airline accountable through legal action and a demand for systemic reform. The next morning, he stood before the world. Cameras flashed, microphones buzzed, reporters filled the room, waiting. The weight of the moment pressed heavily, but Barack remained unwavering. He stepped up to the podium, took a breath, and spoke. Calm, steady, resolute. He described what had happened on that flight, the quiet moments of discrimination that so many experienced, but few had the power to challenge. But he didn't stop there. He spoke about the community that had taken him in, their resilience, their fight to survive in a world that had forgotten them. Their fight is our fight, he declared. The work of justice is never done. The room erupted into applause. But this was just the beginning. A movement was born. Protests erupted in major cities. People demanded answers, not just from the airline, but from the systems that allowed discrimination to thrive. Witnesses from the flight came forward, their testimonies dismantling the airline's flimsy defenses. In the courtroom, the airline fought back, claiming the captain acted in the name of security. But as evidence mounted, their excuses crumbled. Under mounting pressure, the captain was forced to testify. And in that moment, the truth came out. His actions had been fueled by personal bias, not protocol. The ruling was clear. The airline was guilty of discriminatory practices and ordered to make sweeping policy changes. But Barack knew real change wasn't just about winning in court. The real fight was back where it all started. He returned to the community that had helped him, but this time, he didn't come alone. He brought resources, support, and a plan to ensure they were never forgotten again. Schools were built. Infrastructure improved. Voices long ignored were finally heard. The people who had once been invisible were now at the center of a movement. Hector, Maria, James, and Carlos, once struggling to be acknowledged, became leaders in their own right, their fight amplified by the national attention their story had gained. Years later, Barack sat with his family, reflecting on how one moment of injustice had sparked something greater. "You turned something painful into something powerful," Michelle said. He smiled, gazing out the window at the city lights. "It's not just about me," he said. "It's about all of us, what we can achieve when we refuse to give up." The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. Subscribe for more powerful stories. Share this video, and let's keep the conversation going.